The last vote of the session was supposed to be about trade routes. Delegate Sureth of the Devhari had already prepared his closing remarks. He had his numbers ready, his tone rehearsed, and his contempt for the human delegation carefully hidden behind polished words. The Terran Accord had sent 2 people to this session. Just 2. A man named Harlan Voss and a woman named Rivash Shan. They had sat in the far corner of the chamber for 3 days and said almost nothing. Sureth found this amusing. The Galactic Council chamber on Station Orvath was large enough to hold 800 delegates at once. On this day it held 412. Every major species in the known accord was present: the Devhari, the Melvari, the Seathrani, the Kool, and 20 others. Humanity had 1 seat at the edge of the room, near the door, as if they had been placed there so they could be easily asked to leave. High Speaker Auron called the room to order. He was old, even for a Melvari, and his skin had gone pale with age. He read the agenda: trade routes, border patrol agreements, a small dispute between the Kool and the Seathrani over a mining asteroid, standard work. Then Sureth rose from his seat. He did not need to speak about humans. It was not on the agenda, but Sureth had never needed permission to speak, and the chamber always listened when he did. He began slowly, almost gently, describing the state of the Accord, the strength of its members, the balance of power that kept the galaxy stable, and then, quietly, he mentioned the Terran Accord. He called them a developing species. He said they were still finding their footing. He said their contributions to the Accord had been, so far, limited to agricultural exports and a handful of passenger vessels. He smiled when he said it, and the chamber laughed with him, not loudly, but enough. Harlan Voss did not look up from the table. Rivash Shan slid a small, folded paper across the table to him. He opened it, read it, folded it again, and placed it flat on the table with one hand resting on top of it. Sureth continued. He said the Accord should consider reducing the human seat to an observer status. Not as punishment, he assured the room, simply as an honest reflection of what they were: observers, students, not yet equal partners in the great work of civilization. More quiet laughter. A Melvari aide near the back of the chamber leaned toward High Speaker Auron and whispered something in his ear. Auron's expression changed. It was subtle, barely a shift, but Rivash Shan saw it. Auron raised a hand. Sureth stopped speaking. "There is a report coming in from the outer sensor grid," Auron said carefully. "Edge of the Karath expanse. I am told it requires immediate attention." The main display above the chamber floor lit up. It was a standard sensor feed, the kind used to track fleet movements and spatial anomalies. The feed showed a region of deep space far from any trade lane, far from any colony, far from anything considered strategically important. And it was full. The sensor readout showed hull signatures. The system counted them automatically, the number climbing in the top right corner of the display. 10, 100, 1,000, it kept going. The chamber had gone completely quiet. People stopped moving. Someone dropped something and no one looked. The number passed 10,000. 50,000. 100,000. Sureth's mandibles had stopped moving. He was staring at the display with the expression of a person watching something they had decided was impossible. The counter reached 500,000 and stopped. 500,000 dreadnoughts, all of them the same design, all of them stationary, sitting in perfect formation at the edge of known space, running on low power as if they had been waiting for a long time and were comfortable doing so. High Speaker Auron turned slowly toward the human corner of the room. Harlan Voss had already risen from his seat. He did not rush. He walked to the center of the chamber floor, stood beneath the display, and looked up at the numbers for a moment as if confirming something for himself. Then he looked at the room. "High Speaker," he said, "the Terran Accord would like to formally introduce Earth's third deterrent fleet." He let that sit. Third. Not first, not only third. No one in the chamber spoke. No one moved. The display above him cast pale light across 500,000 hulls that had apparently been sitting in the dark for an unknown period of time, waiting for this exact moment to be relevant. Sureth sat down slowly. He did not do it on purpose. His legs simply stopped holding him. Ravashan remained in her seat at the edge of the room. She did not smile. She did not look at Sureth. She looked at her hands, which were folded neatly on the table, and she waited for what came next. What came next was silence. 412 delegates, representing 31 species, with a combined military history stretching back 12,000 years, and not one of them could find a single word. The sensor feed continued its slow sweep across the formation. 500,000 ships, quiet, patient, dark. And somewhere beyond the display, in the deep space where no one had thought to look, humanity had apparently been very busy for a very long time. The file on humanity was 40 pages long. General Isara Deveth of the Melvari military had read it 3 times before sunrise, and each time she finished, she turned back to the first page and started again. Not because she had missed something, because she was looking for the lie, the place where the data had been wrong, the moment where some analyst had made an error that explained what the sensor grid had shown last night. She could not find it. The file was accurate, that was the problem. 40 pages on the Terran Accord, compiled over 60 years by some of the best intelligence teams in the Council. Population numbers, economic output, registered fleet assets, known shipyard locations. The humans had 9 shipyards on record, all of them small, all of them focused on civilian transport and mining support vessels. The largest registered warship in human service was a mid-class patrol frigate, of which they had reportedly built 11. 11. Not 500,000. Deveth set the file down and looked across the war room at Counselor Brenval, who was working through numbers on a calculation tablet with the quiet intensity of a man who had stopped sleeping. "Tell me something useful," she said. Brenval did not look up. "To build 500,000 dreadnoughts at the scale we saw on the sensor feed," he said, "a civilization would need to dedicate its full industrial output, every factory, every material supply line, every available labor source, for approximately 300 years. That's not possible." "No," he said. He looked up then. "It's not, and yet." He turned the tablet around so she could see the numbers. "I ran it 4 different ways, same result each time." Deveth stared at the numbers. "They didn't have the resources." "They didn't have the resources we could see," Brenval said carefully. "That is a different thing entirely." The Council had pulled every available scan of human-controlled space going back a century. What they found, once they started looking with that specific question in mind, was a pattern. Asteroid fields that had gone silent. Rogue moons logged as geologically unstable and flagged off-limits. Deep space sectors marked in human navigation charts as debris hazards. A stellar cloud near the edge of the Kareth expanse that had been reported as too radioactive for transit. A claim no one had ever independently verified, because no one had ever thought to try. Someone had been using that cloud as a ceiling. A junior analyst from the Thrani Intelligence Division found the first forge site by accident. She was cross-referencing thermal bloom data from 80 years ago and noticed a heat signature that didn't match any known stellar event. She flagged it. 3 more analysts cross-checked it. By mid-morning, they had identified 9 forge sites. By afternoon, 12. They called them deep forges, because that was what they were, manufacturing complexes buried inside asteroid clusters and beneath ocean moons, and inside the natural interference of stellar debris, built to be invisible from the outside and productive beyond anything the Accord had thought possible. Deveth looked at the map with 12 red marks on it and felt something she had not felt in 40 years of military service. She recognized it after a moment. It was the specific feeling of realizing you had been wrong about something very important for a very long time. A communication team had recovered fragments of internal human records, not classified documents, just administrative files from what appeared to be a project management archive. Most of it was technical, but buried in one folder was a recorded message, audio only. The voice belonged to a woman named Petra Wolf, listed in the file as chief engineer of a facility designated Deep Forge 9. The message was dated 31 years ago. They played it once in the war room. The woman's voice was calm. She sounded tired in the way that people sound when they have been working for a long time at something they believe in completely. She said, "Every hull we weld for the children who won't see war. Build quietly, build well. That's the whole job." The recording ended. No one spoke for a moment. Then Deveth said, "Pull everything we have on the Keth Passage incident." Brenval already had it open on a second tablet. The Keth Passage incident, 60 years ago. 14 human colony ships destroyed by the Voakai, an aggressive species since made extinct by internal conflict. The Council at the time had reviewed the incident and taken no formal action. The file noted that the human delegation had submitted a formal request for Council intervention twice. Both requests had been declined as outside the Accord's jurisdiction. Deveth read the outcome note at the bottom of the file. It said, "Matter resolved. No further action required." She thought about Petra Wolf, welding hulls in secret for 30 years. "They started building right after this," she said. "Yes," Brenval said, "that appears to be correct." Deveth stood and walked to the window of the war room. Station Orvath's outer ring rotated slowly below her. She could see the docking arms, the trade bays, the lights of 100 ships moving in and out. She thought about what Harlan Voss had said. Third Deterrent Fleet. Not first, third. "Find out where the first two are," she said quietly. No one in the room answered right away. They went back to their screens. They started searching. They did not find them. High Speaker Oren came alone. That was the first unusual thing. He was old enough that he usually traveled with 2 aides and a personal translator, even when speaking to species whose language he knew well. But he arrived at the private meeting room on Orvath's lower ring with no one beside him, and he sat down across from Revash Shan without ceremony. He placed both hands flat on the table. This was a Melvari gesture. It meant, "I am not here to negotiate. I am here to understand." Ravashan recognized it. She sat quietly and waited. "Are those ships meant for us?" Oren asked. He did not say the Council. He did not say the Accord. He said us, and Ravashan understood that he was speaking plainly in the way that very old leaders sometimes do when they have stopped pretending. "No," she said, "not unless you make it necessary." Oren looked at her for a long time. His eyes were pale. They went that color with age in his species. "Then what are they for?" Ravashan considered how to answer, not because she was uncertain, but because the answer had many layers and she was deciding which layer to give him. She gave him all of them. She told him about the Keth Passage incident. He already knew the facts of it: 14 colony ships, the Voakai, the Council's non-intervention decision. What he did not know, or had perhaps chosen not to think about, was what it had felt like from the other side. She described it plainly. 14 ships, over 9,000 people. The colony vessels were not military craft. They were families moving to a new settlement. They had no weapons. They sent a distress call. The Council received it and held a meeting and determined that it was an internal matter outside their purview. The people on those ships were dead before the meeting ended. Oren did not look away. He had the decency for that, at least. After that, Ravashan said, humanity made a decision, not a public one, not announced to the Accord, a quiet internal decision. She described the closed session parliament meeting that followed a year after the Keth Passage, once the grief had settled into something harder. A politician named Albrecht Nauer had stood before the assembly and asked one simple question. What happens if something worse comes and we still have nothing? He was not asking about the Volcae. He was asking about the thing after the Volcae, the thing they hadn't imagined yet, the threat that didn't exist today but would exist in 100 years or 200 in the vast and indifferent dark of a galaxy that had already proven it would not protect them. Nauer did not ask for a war fleet. He asked for a guarantee, a force so large, so undeniable that no species, no alliance, no ancient weapon, no cosmic event that could be anticipated would find it rational to attempt the extinction of humanity. Not a sword, he had said, a lock on the door. The vote had passed at 91%. Oren sat with that for a moment. Outside the small room, the station hummed with the usual sounds of a working port. Somewhere down the corridor, a group of Seathrani traders were arguing about something in loud, fast voices. The Devhari will not accept this, Oren said finally. Sureth will not accept this. We know, Rivas said. He will push for a response, military positioning. He will argue that the fleet is a threat regardless of your stated intent. He is welcome to argue that. Oren leaned forward slightly, and if he acts on it. Rivas Shan's expression did not change. Then he will discover, she said, that 500,000 ships is not the ceiling. Oren was quiet again. He looked at the table. Then he asked the question that had clearly been sitting behind all the others since the beginning. How long have you been doing this? Rivas thought about Petra Wolf, about the men and women who had spent their careers in asteroid fields and beneath ocean moons, welding hulls in the dark, never seeing the stars from the outside. Long enough, she said. When Oren left, Rivas walked back to the main room where Harlan Voss was reviewing a tactical feed. He did not ask how it went. He could read it from her posture. Sureth is moving, she said. What kind of moving? Burned 3 encoded channels in under an hour. He is talking to someone he doesn't want recorded. Voss looked at the feed for another moment. The sensor display still showed the Third Fleet at the edge of the Karath expanse, sitting exactly where they had been, dark and patient. He had been watching it at intervals the way some people watch a fire, not nervously, just steadily. Let him talk, Voss said. We didn't build 500,000 ships to be nervous about one diplomat making calls. Rivas sat down. Outside the viewport, the stars were hard and clear. She thought about the closed session vote, the 91%, all those hands going up in a room that smelled like old furniture and recycled air. She thought about what they had started that day. 100 years of quiet, 100 years of building in the dark. And Sureth was on the other side of the station, burning channels, talking fast, trying to catch up to a problem that had been a century in the making. He was already too late. He just didn't know it yet. The vote was called at the 3rd hour of the morning cycle, when the station was quiet and most of the trade corridors were dark. Not by accident. Sureth had spent the night arranging it. He had spoken to 11 delegates personally, moving between private rooms with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades trading favors and calling them in. He knew which species feared human expansion. He knew which ones had border disputes that could be sharpened into anxiety with the right words. He knew how to make a room agree with him before the room knew it was agreeing. By the time High Speaker Oren opened the emergency session, the outcome was already decided. The motion was simple. All non-human military assets within 50 light-years of the Karath expanse were to withdraw immediately. The official language called it a de-escalation protocol. It cited standard accord procedure for responding to unexpected fleet activity in neutral space. It was professionally written and technically accurate, and everyone in the chamber understood exactly what it was. Fleet Admiral Deva Emrak of the Devhari military attended the session in person. This was unusual. She was not a delegate. She had no speaking rights. But Sureth had arranged an observer seat for her, and she sat in it with the stillness of someone who had learned very young that the most dangerous thing in a room is often the one not speaking. When the vote was opened, Emrak raised her hand not to vote. She had no vote but to be recognized. Orun, to his credit, allowed it. She spoke for 4 minutes. She said that withdrawal was the wrong signal. She said that when a predator makes a display and the other animals retreat, the predator does not conclude that peace has been achieved. She said that what they were calling de-escalation had another name in military circles, and that name was retreat, and retreat invited pursuit. Sureth responded without looking at her. "We do not fight a mountain range," he said. "We go around it, we find another path." Emrak looked at him for a moment, then she sat down. The vote passed. 14 fleet groups across 6 species began pulling back from the border regions near the Karath expanse. Trading posts in 2 of the outer sectors went dark. Beacon relay stations, the navigational infrastructure that allowed fast travel through that region, were quietly repositioned further from the expanse. From the outside, it looked like routine logistical movement. From a sensor grid, it looked like what it was. Harlan Voss watched the feeds from a room on the station's civilian level. He had a cup of water and a chair and nothing else. Rivashan stood near the window. They watched the withdrawal in silence for a while. "They're running," he said. "Or regrouping," she said. "Same thing for now." He watched the last Devhari fleet group cross the 50 light-year line and vanish from the active zone. The Karath expanse on the sensor feed was suddenly very quiet. Just the 3rd Fleet, sitting where it had always been, an empty space around it. Voss thought about what Emrak had said during the session. He had read the transcript. She was not wrong, she was just speaking to the wrong audience. Sureth didn't want military accuracy. He wanted political stability, and stability in the short term meant getting the human fleet off the main display before it became a symbol that other species started thinking about too hard. What Sureth had not considered was what he had already put in motion. 3 hours after the withdrawal vote, a young Melvari aide named Oreth was still in the records room. She worked the late shift by preference, fewer interruptions, better focus. She had been assigned to pull background files on human economic history for the Council's ongoing review, which was the kind of work that sounded important and mostly meant reading through dry production reports from the last century. She almost missed it. Buried in a public academic archive, not classified, not hidden, just old and forgotten, and filed in a subsection that no one had indexed properly, was a paper. It had been submitted 62 years ago to the Galactic Institute of Strategic Research. It had been reviewed and rejected on the grounds that its conclusions were, in the review board's exact words, mathematically ambitious to the point of fantasy. The paper was 94 pages long. Its author was listed as a 17-year-old student from a place called Dortmund, on Earth. Her name was Petra Wolf. The title of the paper was Fleet Architecture for Civilizational Survival, a Practical Model. Oreth read the abstract, then the first chapter, then she stopped and sat very still for a moment. The paper described, in precise and workable terms, exactly how a single species could construct a fleet capable of deterring any known military threat. If that species was willing to commit to a building program spanning multiple generations, use unconventional construction sites, and maintain absolute secrecy about its real production capacity. It wasn't fantasy, it was a blueprint. Oreth attached the paper to a message and sent it to High Speaker Orun with a single line of her own text at the bottom. It read, "They did it." Across the station, in a room on the civilian level, Harlan Voss finished his water and set the cup down. The sensor feed was quiet. The expanse was clear. The 3rd Fleet waited in the dark. He did not know about Oreth or the paper yet, but he knew that somewhere in the station, Sureth was still making calls. And calls meant plans. And plans took time. Time was the one resource that humanity had already spent more carefully than anyone in this galaxy had ever imagined possible. They came from the dark between stars, where nothing was supposed to live. The first sign was silence. 17 relay beacons in the outer band of the Kareth expanse stopped transmitting at the same moment. Not damaged, not destroyed, just quiet, the way a room goes quiet when something large walks in. On Luna Base, deep inside a mountain on Earth's only moon, analyst Danny Rourke was the first person in the Human Intelligence Network to see the pattern. She was 26 years old and had been working the night shift for 8 months. She flagged the beacon outage at 3:14 in the morning, ran a cross-reference with historical anomaly data, and then sat very still for 11 seconds before she picked up the secure line. She did not call her supervisor. She called the office of Harlan Voss directly. "The Ulvrith are in the expanse," she said when he answered. There was a pause, then, "How confident?" "Fully." Another pause, then, "Wake the analysis team, pull file Omega-7." She already had it open. The Ulvrith were not in any public accord record. Most species in the galaxy didn't know they existed. What the Devhari knew, and had kept tightly controlled for several centuries, was that the Ulvrith were something that predated most current civilizations. They were not biological in any simple sense, not mechanical either. They existed somewhere between the two, in a category that human science had labeled biosynthetic and then added several question marks. What they did was well documented, at least in the Devhari archives that human intelligence had quietly copied 40 years ago. The Ulvrith disrupted electronics by generating a field that interacted with electromagnetic systems at a fundamental level. They folded local space in ways that made conventional navigation unreliable. They had been used as weapons of last resort by the Devhari on 3 occasions in recorded history. All 3 times, the target civilization had not recovered. Surath had deployed them. Danny Rourke read that part of Omega-7 3 times. She understood what it meant. Surath had crossed a line that the Devhari hadn't crossed in 400 years. He was either more afraid than he was letting anyone see, or he had run out of other ideas. Possibly both. The Ulvrith entered the forward edge of the 3rd Fleet's formation at 04:40 station time. What happened next was not in any Devhari tactical record, because no one had ever seen it happen before. The disruption field expanded across the leading Dreadnoughts, 200 ships in the outer formation ring. The field was the same one that had shut down the electronics of 3 civilizations, the same one that had left the ruins of a species called the Vorath drifting silent in a dead system for 2 centuries. Nothing happened. The Dreadnoughts kept moving. Their lights stayed on. Their systems ran. The disruption field washed over them like water over stone and did exactly nothing. In the Omega-7 file, Section 4, page 9, there was a specification note written by the lead engineer of Deep Forge 3, a man named Samuel Addo, dated 38 years ago. It read, "All hulls designated deterrent class are fitted with a layered resonance buffer as standard. This addresses the Ulvrith disruption frequency identified in captured Devhari Research Archive 14C. The buffer is passive, requires no active power draw, and adds negligible mass. It has been standard on every hull built since the program's 3rd year." They had known. For 38 years, every single ship in the deterrent fleet had been built to resist this specific weapon. The Ulvrith stopped. They did not retreat. They did not advance. They sat at the edge of the formation in the particular stillness of things that are very old and not used to being surprised. Their sensor profile was strange, not like ships, not like creatures, something the human analysis systems kept trying to categorize and failing. Then one of them sent a signal. Not to the human fleet. The frequency was aimed backward, toward the Devhari staging area outside the 50 light-year boundary. Human linguists on Luna Base ran the signal through 14 translation frameworks in 11 seconds. The word that came back was a question. A single word in a language so old it had no written records, only sound reconstructions. The linguists flagged their confidence level at 73% and put the translation in brackets. It said, "Pray." Ravashan read the translation on her screen and felt something cold move through her. She understood what it meant. The Ulvrith had encountered something that did not break. In 4 centuries of recorded use, they had apparently never encountered that before. They were asking, in the only way they knew how, whether the thing in front of them was something they were supposed to be eating. They were not asking the humans. They were asking Sureth. Sureth did not answer, or could not. Either way, the absence of an answer was its own kind of information. The Ulvrith began to move again, not toward the human fleet. Slowly, with the patience of things that had been alive for longer than most species had existed, they turned and began moving back the way they had come. Back toward the 50 light-year line. Back toward the Devhari staging area. Back toward Sureth. Harlan Voss watched the sensor feed. He said nothing for a long time. Then he turned to Ravashan. She said it before he could. He has lost control of his own weapon. Voss looked at the feed. The Ulvrith were moving steadily now, unhurried, like something that had decided where it was going and was not in a rush because it did not need to be. "Get the deflection teams ready," he said. "Full intercept pattern. We redirect them before they reach the line." Non-lethal. "We didn't build 500,000 ships to start a war with something ancient because a diplomat panicked," he said. "Non-lethal. We redirect them into deep space, and then we call the council." He looked at the feed one more time. "Tell them," he said, "that we just saved the Devhari fleet from their own secret weapon, and that we'd like to discuss the terms of our new relationship." Navigational interference pattern took 40 minutes to deploy. It worked in 12. The Ulvrith, ancient and patient and apparently quite willing to be redirected when the alternative was unclear, turned away from the Devhari staging area and drifted outward deep into open space, away from any lane, any colony, any station. Human ships flanked them at a distance, not aggressively, simply maintaining the corridor that the interference pattern created, the way you might guide something large and old and not necessarily hostile with careful, consistent pressure. The last Ulvrith signature crossed the deep boundary marker at 07:22 station time and disappeared into the void. No weapons fired, not a single hull mark on either side. Danny Rourke sat back in her chair on Luna Base and breathed for what felt like the first time in 3 hours. Around her, the analysis team was still running checks, pulling data, cross-referencing the sensor logs. Someone was making notes. Someone else was updating the Omega-7 file with a new entry. She looked at her window. Outside was the gray surface of the moon, and above it the black of space, and she thought about Samuel Addo writing that specification note 38 years ago, adding the resonance buffer to every hull quietly as a standard feature, because the math said a threat like this was possible, and the math was not something you argued with. She thought about Petra Wolf saying build quietly, build well. She thought about all the people she had never met who had made this morning possible. Then she closed the Omega-7 file and opened the secure channel, because there was still work to do. In the council chamber on Station Orvath, High Speaker Oran called an emergency session for the second time in 4 days. This one had a different quality than the first. The first session had been shock, the raw, unprocessed kind, where people go quiet because their categories have stopped working. This session was something else. It was the particular atmosphere that follows a narrow escape that no one is willing to fully name. Everyone in the chamber knew that the Ulvrith had been deployed. The Devhari delegation had not confirmed it officially, but the sensor data had been widely shared, and the Ulvrith signature was not something you could misidentify once you knew what to look for. Everyone also knew that the human fleet had redirected them, without firing a single shot. Sureth was not at his seat. His delegation chair was occupied by a junior aide who looked like she would rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. There were no official announcements about Sureth's whereabouts. The Devhari government, via a very short message to the council, had stated only that Delegate Sureth was currently unavailable and that his credentials were under review. Whatever was happening on the Devhari side of things, it was happening behind closed doors, and it was happening fast. Oren gave the floor to Harlan Voss. Voss stood at the center of the chamber. He did not use notes. He did not raise his voice. He spoke the way people speak when they are saying something they have thought about for a long time and no longer feel the need to perform. He said, "We did not build those ships because we want to rule anything. We built them because we remember what it felt like to have 14 colony ships destroyed and be told it was outside the Accord's jurisdiction. We built them because we made a decision, a long time ago, that we would never again be in a position where someone else's choice to do nothing was enough to end us." He paused. He said, "That is not a threat. It is a fact about us. It is who we became after Keth Passage, and we make no apology for it." He let that sit for a moment. Then he said that the Terran Accord was prepared to remain in the Galactic Council, but not on the current terms. Every treaty that governed human participation in the Accord, trade access, border agreements, military recognition thresholds, voting weight, all of it would be renegotiated on equal terms. Not favorable terms, equal ones. If the Council declined, humanity would withdraw from the Accord entirely. No war, no blockade, no hostile action. They would simply leave, return to their space, and continue doing what they had been doing for 100 years, which the room now understood meant building, quietly and improving and waiting, with the patience of people who were very good at the long game. He said, "The choice is yours. We are comfortable either way." Then he returned to his seat. The vote that followed was the fastest in Council history, unanimous. Every treaty with the Terran Accord was opened for renegotiation. The session was adjourned within the hour. On Earth, the broadcast of Voss's speech was watched live by 14 billion people. In offices, in schools, in the shipyards of Deep Forge 7, where the workers stopped their shifts to pull up the feed on their personal screens and watch in silence. In the asteroid belts where the Deep Forge maintenance crews kept working even as they listened, because the work didn't stop just because something historic was happening. The work was why something historic was happening. Danny Rourke watched it from Luna Base, alone in the analysis room after the rest of her team had left. She watched Voss standing in the chamber with the sensor display still showing the Third Fleet behind him, 500,000 ships sitting dark and patient at the edge of the Karath expanse. When it was over, she pulled up the Omega-7 file one more time. She went to the cover page. There was a note there, not a specification, not a technical entry, just a line written by Albrecht Nauer himself, the man who had started the whole program a century ago, in the weeks after the closed session vote. He had written, "We are not building weapons. We are building the right to be left alone." She read it twice, then she closed the file. Outside the window, the moon's surface was the same gray it had always been. The stars above it were the same stars they had always been. The only thing that had changed was that the galaxy now knew, clearly and permanently, what was out there in the dark. 500,000 ships, quiet, unbroken, patient. And that was only the Third Fleet.